The dust tasted like regret. It coated Caleb's tongue, grit between his teeth, mirroring the feeling in his chest. He wrestled the steering wheel of the battered Ford, the truck, bucking against the onslaught of the storm. Red dirt swirled, a choking curtain that reduced visibility to near zero. He hadn't seen a proper rain in months, not since Sarah. He squinted, wipers slashing in vain against the ochre haze. The wheat, his livelihood, his promise to her, was dying. Standing stalks, once thick and golden, were now brittle, bleached skeletons, bowing under the weight of the dust. He'd walked the fields yesterday trying to gauge the loss. 70%, maybe more, 70% of nothing. He killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the howl of the wind. The dust seeped in through every crack in the cab, a fine powder settling on the dashboard, the seats, his work-worn hands. He should be used to it. This was Kansas. This was always the risk. But this wasn't normal. This wasn't just a bad season. This was something else. He forced himself out of the truck, pulling the collar of his flannel shirt high around his nose. He needed to check the south fence, the one bordering Old Man Hemlock's land. Cattle had a way of finding weak spots, and he couldn't afford to lose even one. The wind tore at him, a physical assault. He braced himself, pushing forward, his boots sinking into the drifting dust. It felt like walking through water, a slow, agonizing slog. Each breath was a rasping struggle. He found the break in the fence easily enough. A fallen post, rotted at the base. Hemlock's longhorns were notorious for testing boundaries. As he started to gather the fallen wood, his gaze drifted upward, beyond the broken fence, further into the wheat field. Something was wrong. A swathe of flattened wheat, circular in shape, lay starkly against the ravaged landscape. It wasn't haphazard. It wasn't wind damage. This was precise, deliberate. He stared. The dust momentarily forgotten. A prank, it had to be. Some kids from town, looking for a thrill. Though, what kind of thrill did you get from destroying a man's livelihood? He walked toward it, each step crunching on brittle stalks. The circle was larger than he'd initially thought, easily 50 feet in diameter. As he got closer, he noticed the intricate patterns within Foodie, not just a random flattening, but a series of complex geometric shapes, interweaving lines and curves. He circled the perimeter, boots leaving faint prints in the dust. The wheat hadn't been broken. Exactly. It was bent, almost folded over, the stems unbroken, but lying flat, spiraling inward. He knelt, running a calloused hand over the smooth, unbroken stalks. The precision, it was unsettling. A fractured heat shimmered above the field. He felt a prickle on the back of his neck, the uncomfortable sense of being watched. He scanned the horizon, but the dust obscured everything beyond a few yards. Just his imagination, he told himself. The stress, the worry, the memory hit him like a punch to the gut. Sarah standing in this same field, her face alight with hope, pointing to the newly sprouted wheat. A good harvest, Caleb, a really good harvest. We can finally, the sentence always trailed off in his mind, the unspoken promise of a better future forever unfinished. He'd been so confident, then, so sure they could turn things around, but complacency had crept in, followed by bad luck and worse decisions. He'd taken out a second mortgage, hoping to expand, to diversify. Then the rain stopped, and Sarah got sick. The medical bills had swallowed their savings whole, bleeding them dry. He'd remortgaged the farm again, then again. Now he was drowning in debt, owing more to the bank than the land was worth. Old Man Hemlock had offered to buy him out, a lowball offer that would leave him with nothing. He'd refused, clinging to the farm like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. It was all he had left of her. He stood up abruptly, brushing the dust from his jeans. He needed to get back to the house, to Lily. She'd been asking about the wheat, about whether they'd have enough money for school clothes this year. He hadn't given her a straight answer. He found her in the kitchen, sketching at the table, her brow furrowed in concentration. Lily was 14, with Sarah's dark hair and a stubborn streak a mile wide. She'd inherited her mother's quiet strength, but she was starting to show the strain of their circumstances. "What are you drawing?" he asked, trying to sound cheerful. "Just shapes," she said, not looking up. "I was thinking about the field. I was walking near the fence, and, Dad, did you see it?" He hesitated. "See what?" She pointed to her sketchpad. It was a near-perfect replica of the patterns he'd seen in the wheat field. The intricate geometric designs rendered with surprising accuracy. "That?" She looked up, her dark eyes questioning. "The circle. It is weird, and there are symbols inside. I don't recognize them." She pointed to a series of stylized curves and angles within the drawing. "They look old." Caleb stared at the sketch, a cold knot forming in his stomach. He dismissed it as a prank, but Lily's drawing, her attention to detail, it suggested something more. He didn't like it, not one bit. "Probably just kids," he said, forcing a casual tone, trying to be clever. "Don't worry about it." Lily wasn't convinced. "But Dad, they're really precise, and it is huge. It doesn't look like something kids could do." He sighed. He knew he wasn't fooling her. She was too smart. "I'll take another look," he said, "after I fix the fence." He made her a sandwich, trying to ignore the tremor in his hands. He needed to get a grip. He was a farmer, a provider. He wasn't supposed to be rattled by a few flattened crops and a teenage girl's curiosity. Later that evening, while Lily was doing her homework, Caleb turned on the small television in the living room. He'd rarely watched the news lately. Too depressing. But tonight, he needed a distraction. The local news channel flickered to life. The anchorwoman, Brenda Miller, looking grim, and we're receiving reports of strange occurrences across several counties. Farmers in Harper County are reporting similar crop formations in their fields. Authorities are dismissing them as elaborate hoaxes, but witnesses claim to have seen unusual lights in the sky around the time the formations appeared. In Stafford County, livestock have been behaving erratically, with reports of cattle refusing to enter certain fields. Residents are reporting unexplained power outages and interference with electronic devices. Caleb stared at the screen, a wave of dread washing over him. It wasn't just his farm, it wasn't just a prank. Something was happening, something strange and unsettling. Brenda Miller continued. Local authorities are urging residents to remain calm and report any unusual activity. We'll have more on these developing stories as they unfold. He switched off the television, the silence in the room suddenly oppressive. He glanced at Lily, her face illuminated by the glow of her desk lamp, her eyes focused on her textbook. He wanted to protect her, to shield her from whatever was happening, but he had a feeling that wouldn't be possible. He walked to the window, peering out into the darkness. The dust storm had subsided, leaving behind a layer of fine red powder on everything. The moon was a pale, ghostly disk in the sky. He scanned the edge of his property, the wheat field stretching out like a dark, silent sea. He froze. A figure stood at the edge of the field, near the crop circle, silhouetted against the faint moonlight. Tall and lean, almost indistinct in the gloom, the figure was watching the circle, motionless, observing. Caleb blinked, trying to make out details, but the dust and the distance obscured the figure's features. He reached for the binoculars on the windowsill, his fingers trembling. He raised the binoculars to his eyes, focusing on the dark shape. He could make out the outline of a jacket, dark pants, nothing more. He adjusted the focus, trying to penetrate the gloom, but as he did, the figure turned, as if sensing his gaze. And then, with unsettling speed, it melted into the dust, disappearing without a trace. Caleb lowered the binoculars, his heart pounding in his chest. He stared at the empty field, the silence broken only by the whisper of the wind. He wasn't alone, and he had the sinking feeling that whatever had created the circle Whatever was happening across the surrounding counties was now watching him. The internet smelled like desperation. Caleb sat hunched over his ancient desktop, the glow of the screen illuminating the dust motes dancing in the pre-dawn gloom. He'd barely slept, haunted by the image of the shadowed figure and the unsettling reports from the news. He'd started with a simple Google search, Kansas crop circles. The results were a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, grainy photographs, and pseudo-scientific babble, alien landings, electromagnetic anomalies, government experiments. He dismissed most of it as nonsense until he stumbled upon articles linking crop circles to ancient pagan rituals, to esoteric societies and forgotten deities. One site, a forum, dedicated to unexplained phenomena, focused on a recurring symbol found in formations worldwide. The symbol, a complex intertwining of curves and angles, was eerily familiar. It matched one of the designs Lily had sketched from the crop circle. The forum users spoke of it as a key, a gateway to something ancient and powerful. They called the group behind the formations the Harvesters. He scoffed, running a hand through his thinning hair. Harvesters sounded like a bad horror movie. But the sheer volume of reports, the consistency of the symbols, it was unsettling. He closed the laptop, the hollow click echoing in the quiet house. He needed a rational explanation. He needed Sheriff Brody. The sheriff's office was a single-room affair in the town of Havenwood, smelling of stale coffee and disinfectant. Brody, a man built like an oak tree with a face to match, listened to Caleb's story with thinly veiled amusement. A crop circle, Caleb? Seriously? Probably just some college kids pulling a prank. We get it every year around harvest time. It is not a prank, Sheriff. It is precise. And there is something else, strange things happening. My tractor wouldn't start this morning. Bessie, the milk cow, hasn't given a drop all day, and my daughter says she saw someone out there, watching. Brody leaned back in his chair, the springs groaning in protest. Tractors break down, cows have off days, and kids sneak around. That is life in Kansas, Caleb. Now you're stressed about the drought, I understand. But don't go seeing things. Caleb clenched his fists, fighting the urge to argue. Brody wasn't a malicious man, just a pragmatist. He didn't have time for ghost stories. Just keep an eye out. Sheriff, if you hear anything at all. I will, Caleb, but I doubt I will. Now, you get back to your farm and try not to worry so much. He drove back to the farm, frustration simmering inside him. The sheriff's dismissal only reinforced his unease. He felt alone, facing something he didn't understand. The strange occurrences continued throughout the day, escalating in frequency and intensity. The generator sputtered and died, plunging the house into darkness. The radio crackled with static, unable to pick up a clear signal. Even the dog, Buster, usually a cheerful golden retriever, whimpered and hid under the porch, refusing to come out. That night, Caleb was plagued by nightmares. He dreamt he was standing in the wheat field, surrounded by shadowy figures, in hooded robes. They chanted in a language he didn't recognize, their voices a discordant drone that burrowed into his skull. He saw Lily, her face pale and frightened, being led toward a dark altar. He woke up in a cold sweat, his heart racing, the chant echoing in his ears. He stumbled out of bed, needing to be outside, to feel the earth beneath his feet. He grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the back of the property, toward the ancient oak tree that had stood sentinel over the farm for generations. Old Man Hemlock lived on the fringes of society, a recluse who preferred the company of his cattle to people. He was a wiry man with eyes that seemed to have absorbed the vastness of the prairie. Most folks considered him eccentric, but Caleb had always found him to be observant. He found Hemlock mending a fence, his movements slow but deliberate. "Heard you had a visitor in your wheat," Hemlock said, not looking up. Caleb was startled. You heard. Word gets around, Hemlock said, finally meeting his gaze. His eyes were dark and knowing. You seen the circle? I have. It is strange. Hemlock chuckled. A dry, rasping sound. Strange, don't begin to cover it. You know what that is, Caleb. That is a calling card. A calling card for what? The Harvesters. Caleb froze. The name from the internet, spoken aloud by this grizzled old farmer, sent a shiver down his spine. You know about them. Hemlock leaned against the fence, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. Been knowing about them for a long time. They've been around these parts for generations. They come and go with the seasons, with the droughts, with the unrest. What do they want? Land, mostly. Souls. They believe the land holds power, ancient power, and they believe they're the ones chosen to wield it. He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. They offer things, a good harvest, healthy livestock, in exchange for a small price. What kind of price? Caleb asked, dread creeping into his voice. Hemlock shook his head. Don't ask. Just stay away from them. Don't make any deals, and protect your daughter. How do I do that? Pray and watch the signs. They leave them everywhere. Symbols, offerings, they're always watching. Later that afternoon, Lily was rummaging through a dusty trunk in the attic, searching for old photographs. It was a rainy afternoon, a welcome respite from the relentless sun, but the gloominess of the attic seemed to weigh on her. Dad, she called out, her voice muffled. I found something. You might want to see this. She led him to the trunk, filled with her mother's belongings, old letters, journals, photographs, and small trinkets. Sarah had been a local historian, fascinated by the folklore and legends of the region. Lily pointed to a hidden compartment at the bottom of the trunk, concealed beneath a layer of old quilts. Inside was a collection of maps and research notes, bound together with a faded ribbon. The maps were hand-drawn, depicting the surrounding counties, with strange markings and symbols overlaid on the landscape. Caleb recognized one of the symbols immediately. It was the same one from the crop circle, the same one Lily had sketched, the same one he'd seen on the internet. He carefully unfolded one of the research notes. It was Sarah's handwriting, neat and precise. The note detailed a local legend about a secret society that worshipped an ancient earth goddess. The society, known as the Children of the Harvest, believed that the land was sacred and that certain individuals were chosen to act as their intermediaries. They seek to harness the power of the land, Caleb read aloud, to ensure a bountiful harvest and safeguard the community. But their methods are, they demand a sacrifice. He stopped, his blood turning to ice. Sacrifice. He looked at Lily, her face pale with apprehension. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that they had stumbled onto something dangerous, something far beyond a simple crop circle prank. He had to understand what Sarah knew, what she was researching. He had to find out what the harvesters wanted. And he had to protect Lily, no matter the cost. He decided to revisit the oak tree, the one Hemlock mentioned. He walked through the deepening twilight, the field silent and watchful. When he reached the tree, the flashlight beam revealed something that made his breath hitch in his throat, carved into the ancient bark, almost obscured by years of growth. Was the symbol the same intricate pattern, identical to the one in the crop circle, the one in Sarah's research? And beneath the carving, nestled in a hollow in the bark, was a small offering, a carefully arranged sheaf of wheat, tied with a strand of crimson ribbon. Fresh, it hadn't been there yesterday. The smell of damp earth and decay clung to Hemlock's cabin like a shroud. Caleb sat across from the old man, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, the chipped ceramic warming his hands. Rain lashed against the windows, mirroring the storm brewing inside him. They go back a long way, Hemlock said, his voice gravelly. Further back than anyone remembers, the original settlers, they brought the beliefs with them, old country ways tied to the land, to the cycles of planting and harvest. It started harmless enough, a way to honor the earth, to ensure a good yield, but it twisted over time. Hemlock took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes fixed on Caleb. They believe the land has a spirit, a life force, and they believe that spirit needs to be appeased, fed. It demands a balance, a sacrifice. Caleb felt a knot tightening in his stomach. Sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? Hemlock hesitated, his gaze drifting toward the window. Used to be livestock, choice cuts of beef, the fattest lambs. But that wasn't enough. The land, it got hungrier. They started offering crops, the first fruits of the harvest. Then they started taking things from people, things they valued, and sometimes he trailed off, his voice barely a whisper. Sometimes they took people. Caleb's voice was barely audible. They called them gifts to the earth, said they were ensuring a bountiful harvest for everyone else. It was always shrouded in secrecy, of course, denials, cover-ups. Folks who asked too many questions, they tended to disappear. Hemlock explained that the harvesters operated in cycles, periods of dormancy followed by renewed activity. Typically during times of hardship, 30 droughts, floods, economic downturns. They preyed on desperation, offering solutions in exchange for loyalty and obedience. They're opportunists, Caleb, Hemlock said. They watch, they wait. And when people are at their weakest, they offer a hand, but it is a hand with claws. Caleb left Hemlock's cabin shaken. The drive back to the farm felt longer than usual, the rain blurring the landscape into a grey, menacing wash. He hadn't even pulled into the barnyard when he saw it. Painted in crude red letters across the weathered wood of the barn were the symbols, the intertwined curves and angles, mocking him in the downpour. The vandalism wasn't just malicious, it felt like a warning, a blatant show of power. His gut twisted. This wasn't some teenage prank. Old man Hemlock was right. They were watching him. They were sending a message. The unsettling feeling intensified when he picked Lily up from school. She was unusually quiet on the drive home, her eyes darting nervously around. "Everything okay, honey?" he asked, trying to sound casual. She shrugged. "Just, some kids were being weird." "Weird how?" "They kept staring at me. And one of the girls, Bethany Miller Trender, Miller's daughter, and she said something." "What did she say?" Lily hesitated, her lower lip trembling. She said my dad was making trouble, that we should just let things be." Caleb's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Bethany Miller was a known gossip, but her words felt deliberate, like a veiled threat. "Did she say anything else?" "No, just, she looked at me like she knew something I didn't." He dropped Lily off at the house, promising to make her favorite dinner. But his appetite was gone. He spent the evening scouring county records online, tracing land ownership. What he found chilled him to the core. Over the past few years, a shell corporation, registered under the innocuous name of Harvest Properties, LLC, had been quietly buying up farmland in the surrounding counties. The pattern was disturbing. They weren't interested in profitable farms. They were targeting land surrounding the oldest, most historically significant farms and farms like his. They were encircling them, isolating them. He felt like a mouse trapped in a maze, the walls closing in. As dusk settled over the farm, a figure emerged from the shadows at the edge of his property, tall and slender, cloaked in a dark hooded coat, its face obscured by the shadows. Caleb grabbed his shotgun, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't seen anyone approach. He hadn't heard a vehicle. "Who is there?" he called out, his voice tight with apprehension. The figure didn't respond, simply gliding forward, its movements eerily fluid. It stopped near the fence, its shadowy form looming against the darkening sky. "Mr. Corbin," the figure said, its voice a soft, almost hypnotic murmur. "What do you want?" Caleb asked, keeping the shotgun trained on the figure. "We want to help. We understand the hardships you're facing. The drought, the debts, it is a heavy burden." "I don't need your help," the figure chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "Everyone needs help, Mr. Corbin, especially when they're facing ruin. We offer a solution, a way to secure your future, to ensure a bountiful harvest. All we ask in return is cooperation. Cooperation. What does that mean?" "It means joining us, becoming a part of something bigger. A community dedicated to honoring the land, to preserving its legacy." Caleb felt a surge of anger. "You're talking about the harvesters, aren't you?" The figure didn't deny it. "We prefer to think of ourselves as stewards of the land, those who understand its true power. I know what you are, and I want you off my property. That is a shame, Mr. Corbin. A real shame. You're making a mistake that could cost you everything." The figure paused, then continued, its voice laced with a subtle threat. "Think about your daughter, Mr. Corbin. She deserves a secure future, a life free from worry." Caleb's hand trembled, the shotgun wavering slightly. He lowered it involuntarily, his gaze fixed on the figure. "Don't you dare threaten her." The figure offered a slow, unsettling smile. "No threat, Mr. Corbin, just a friendly word of advice. Consider our offer. We'll be in touch." Then, as quickly and silently as it had appeared, the figure turned and vanished into the darkness, leaving Caleb standing alone in the rain, a cold dread gripping his heart. He rushed inside, locking the doors and windows, his senses on high alert. He found Lily finishing her homework at the kitchen table. He wanted to hold her, to shield her from whatever was coming. "Lily, you need to be careful," he said, his voice trembling. "Stay close to the house. Don't talk to strangers." "Okay, Dad," she said, looking up at him with a worried expression. After dinner, he walked Lily to the bus stop in the morning, watching until the yellow school bus disappeared down the road. Too normal. When he returned home, the silence was unnerving. He started preparing for his day, checking the livestock, planning his limited fieldwork. But around 4 p.m., the sheriff called. "Caleb, you need to get to the school. Now." "What is wrong?" "Lily, she is missing. Her friends say she never came home from school. They've searched the building, the grounds, nothing. Her backpack is still in her locker, but—" Brody paused, his voice grim. "They found this." He described it, a single stalk of wheat, lying on the sidewalk near the bus stop, tied with a strand of crimson ribbon, the same ribbon as the offering on the oak tree. The sheriff's methodical search felt agonizingly slow. Brody was a good man, Caleb knew, but he was hampered by procedure, by a need for evidence. Caleb didn't have time for evidence. He had a daughter to find. "I'm going to look myself," he told Brody, his voice raspy with desperation. "You need to let us handle this. You're too close. Close. My daughter is missing. I'm not going to sit here and wait for you to fill out paperwork." He ignored Brody's protests, borrowing his truck through a heavier-duty vehicle than his own 20 and tearing off into the gathering dusk. He had a gut feeling, a desperate conviction that the harvesters were behind this, and he had to find Lily before it was too late. He started with Lily's backpack, retrieved from the school. It was neat, meticulously organized, just like her. He meticulously sifted through her books, her notebooks, her pens. Nothing seemed out of place. Until he found the drawing. Tucked inside her history textbook was a hastily sketched map, a crude rendering of the countryside surrounding Havenwood. The map focused on an abandoned grain elevator, a towering metal skeleton that loomed on the outskirts of town, a relic of a bygone era. A small circle was drawn around the elevator, and beneath it, scrawled in Lily's handwriting, were 2 words. They meet. His heart leaped. This was it. This was where they had taken her. He raced towards the elevator, the pickup truck bouncing over the rutted dirt road. The structure loomed larger, with each passing mile, a dark and ominous presence against the twilight sky. It hadn't been used in decades, left to rust and decay, a forgotten monument to agricultural ambition. He parked the truck a safe distance away, slipping into the shadows, his shotgun clutched tightly in his hands. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay, and an unsettling silence hung over the area. He approached the elevator cautiously, his footsteps muffled by the overgrown weeds. He could hear chanting now, a low, rhythmic drone that seemed to vibrate through the ground. The sound was coming from inside the elevator. He crept around the side of the building, peering through a broken window. What he saw made his blood run cold. The interior of the elevator had been transformed. The vast, cavernous space was illuminated by flickering candlelight, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Roughly 20 figures, clad in dark hooded robes, were arranged in a circle around a makeshift altar. In the center of the altar, bound and gagged, was Lily. Her eyes were wide with terror, her face pale and streaked with tears. She was wearing a white dress, an unsettling contrast to the dark robes of her captors. Leading the ceremony was a figure even more imposing than the others. Tall and gaunt, with a shaved head and piercing black eyes, the figure radiated an aura of cold authority. He held a curved, obsidian blade aloft, chanting in a language Caleb didn't recognize, his voice resonating with a hypnotic power. It was the veiled figure from the night before. Caleb felt a surge of rage, a primal fury that threatened to consume him. He didn't hesitate. He kicked open the door, bursting into the elevator, shotgun raised. "Let her go," he roared, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. The chanting stopped abruptly. The robed figures turned towards him, their faces obscured by the shadows of their hoods. A collective gasp filled the air. The cult leader slowly lowered the obsidian blade, his eyes fixated on Caleb. "How predictable," he said, his voice smooth and menacing, a desperate father rushing to the rescue. "I said, let her go," Caleb repeated, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You don't understand, Mr. Corbin," the leader said, raising his hand in a gesture of calm. "We're not harming your daughter. We're offering her to the land, to ensure a bountiful harvest, to save us all. You're insane. We are enlightened. We understand the ancient ways. The land demands a sacrifice. And your daughter, she is the chosen one. She possesses a purity, a connection to the earth that is rare and precious." Caleb fired the shotgun, sending a blast of buckshot into the air. The robed figures screamed and scattered, diving for cover. The cult leader didn't flinch. He simply raised his hand again, and 2 of the figures surged forward, lunging at Caleb. He swung the shotgun, knocking one of the figures off balance. The other one tackled him to the ground, wrestling for control of the weapon. Caleb fought back with a ferocity born of desperation, kicking and punching, trying to break free. The fight was brutal, chaotic. The robed figures swarmed around him, their hands grabbing and clawing. He managed to land a few blows, but they were outnumbered, outmatched. One of the figures managed to wrest the shotgun from his grasp, sending it clattering across the concrete floor. Another struck him in the head with a heavy object, sending a searing pain through his skull. He stumbled backward, dazed and disoriented. He saw Lily struggling against her bonds, her eyes pleading with him. He had to reach her. He had to save her. He forced himself to his feet, ignoring the pain, the dizziness. He charged towards the altar, shoving aside anyone who got in his way. but the cult leader was waiting for him. He raised the obsidian blade and with a swift, precise movement, slashed it across Caleb's arm. A searing pain shot through his body. He cried out, clutching his bleeding arm. He staggered, his legs threatening to give way. The cult leader advanced, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "It is over, Mr. Corbin," he said. "You can't stop us. The harvest is at hand." He raised the obsidian blade again, preparing to deliver the final blow. The chanting resumed, louder now, more frenzied. The candlelight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Lily screamed. The leader brought the blade down. The pain in Caleb's arm was a white-hot brand, but it was swallowed by a deeper, more primal rage, a grief so intense it felt like a physical force. He wasn't just fighting for Lily anymore. He was fighting for Sarah, for the farm, for everything he'd lost. Ignoring the agony, throwing himself at the cult leader with a desperate, reckless abandon. The obsidian blade whistled past his ear, slicing through his jacket. He grabbed the leader's wrist, his grip like a vise, and twisted with all his strength. A sickening crack echoed through the elevator. The leader screamed, dropping the blade. Caleb didn't hesitate. He slammed his fist into the leader's jaw, sending him stumbling backward. He didn't have the strength for finesse, for strategy. He just fought, a brutal, desperate scramble of fists and elbows, fueled by pure adrenaline. He tackled the leader to the ground, pinning him beneath his weight, raining down blows until the man lay still, gasping for breath. But the other cult members weren't giving out. They surged forward, their eyes burning with fanaticism. Caleb braced himself for another onslaught, knowing he couldn't hold them off for long. He was outnumbered, injured, and exhausted. Then a voice boomed from the doorway. "Hold it right there." Caleb glanced up, his vision blurry. Standing in the entrance of the elevator, silhouetted against the dim light, was Old Man Hemlock. And he wasn't alone. Behind Hemlock stood a dozen or so local farmers, armed with shotguns, pitchforks, and whatever else they could find, faces hardened with resolve, their eyes blazing with anger. They were a motley crew, weathered and worn, but united in their determination. "You picked the wrong farm to mess with," Hemlock growled, his voice ringing with authority. The tide had turned. The farmers charged into the elevator, a wave of righteous fury sweeping through the space. The cult members, caught off guard, faltered, their chanting dissolving into panicked cries. A chaotic brawl erupted, a furious maelstrom of fists and weapons. Caleb struggled to his feet, ignoring the throbbing pain in his arm. He saw Sheriff Brody and his deputies finally arrive, sirens wailing in the distance, their arrival adding to the pandemonium. "Everyone freeze," Brody shouted, trying to restore order. "Drop your weapons." But the cult members were too far gone, lost in their fanaticism. They continued to fight, desperate to protect their leader, their beliefs. The ritualistic symbols painted on the floor were being trampled, broken. The candles were extinguished, plunging sections of the elevator into darkness. The air was thick with dust, sweat, and the scent of fear. The cult leader, seeing his followers crumbling, attempted to escape, crawling towards a side door. Caleb intercepted him, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against a metal support beam. "It is over," Caleb said, his voice raw with emotion. "It is finally over," the leader spat in his face. "You haven't seen the last of us." He rasped, his eyes filled with a chilling intensity. "This is not the end. It is merely a pause. The land demands its due. A greater harvest is coming." Just then, a deafening roar filled the air. A powerful gust of wind swept through the opening of the elevator, whipping up a swirling vortex of dust and debris. The visibility plummeted to near zero. Caleb blinked, shielding his eyes. When he looked again, the cult leader was gone, vanished into the swirling dust like a phantom. "He is getting away," someone shouted, but it was too late. The dust storm was too intense, the darkness too complete. They couldn't pursue him. Caleb turned his attention to Lily. She was still bound to the altar, trembling with fear. He rushed to her side, desperately working to untie the ropes. "Dad," she whispered, her voice weak. "I've got you, honey," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I've got you." He finally managed to free her, pulling her into his arms. She clung to him tightly, sobbing uncontrollably. "It is okay now," he murmured, stroking her hair. "You're safe now." Sheriff Brody and his deputies quickly secured the scene, arresting the remaining cult members. Paramedics arrived to tend to the injured, including Caleb, whose arm was bandaged and splintered. As the dust storm began to subside, revealing a landscape coated in a thick layer of red dust, Caleb stood outside the elevator, holding Lily close. The air was heavy with the smell of rain, a faint promise of renewal. He looked out at the fields, his fields, ravaged by drought and now marked by the scars of violence. The harvesters were gone, for now, but their leader's words echoed in his ears. "A greater harvest is coming." He looked at Lily, her face buried in his shoulder. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He would protect her. He would fight for her. He would do whatever it took to ensure that she never had to face the darkness again. But a seed of doubt had been planted, a nagging feeling that this wasn't over, that the harvesters and their twisted beliefs were still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the opportunity to rise again. And as he gazed out into the swirling dust, he couldn't shake the feeling that the land itself was watching, waiting, and perhaps demanding its due. The dust settled, both literally and figuratively, but a lingering residue clung to everything, to the air, to the soil, to Caleb and Lily's hearts. The aftermath of the raid on the grain elevator was a whirlwind of police interviews, forensic investigations, and whispered conversations with concerned neighbors. Sheriff Brody, looking weary but relieved, sat with Caleb in the kitchen, a chipped mug of coffee warming his hands. "We've rounded up the rest of them. Seems they were mostly local folks down on their luck, susceptible to a crazy idea." "What about the leader?" Caleb asked, his voice still rough from the fight. Brody shook his head. "Vanished. We've got search parties out. But with this dust, it is like looking for a ghost. Name is Elias Thorne. We're digging into his background." The investigation quickly unearthed a tragic history. Elias Thorne's grandfather had been a farmer in the region during the Dust Bowl, losing his land and his livelihood to the relentless drought. Thorne had grown up hearing stories of the land's wrath, believing it demanded retribution for the exploitation it had suffered. He saw himself as a chosen one, destined to appease the land and restore its balance. He was obsessed, Brody explained, filled with a warped sense of righteousness. He believed the ancient spirits of the land were being ignored, and that sacrifices were necessary to ensure a bountiful harvest. The stories, once whispered in hushed tones, now felt horrifically real. Caleb thought about the offering of wheat, the symbols, the chilling words of Thorne, "A greater harvest is coming." It wasn't about a good yield, it was about control, about dominating the land through twisted ritual. The dismantling of the harvesters' network was surprisingly straightforward. They weren't a complex organization, just a small group of desperate individuals, drawn together by shared delusion and Thorne's charismatic manipulation. Their influence, however, had been insidious, spreading like a slow poison through the county. The weeks that followed were a blur of doctor's appointments, therapy sessions, and quiet moments of connection between Caleb and Lily. Lily slowly began to heal, her nightmares lessening, the fear in her eyes fading with each passing day. Caleb found solace in her recovery, but the scars, both physical and emotional thizzen, ran deep. He still woke in the night, haunted by the image of Thorne's face, by the chanting within the elevator. He spent hours poring over Sarah's research, the maps and notes she'd meticulously collected over years. He'd always known she was passionate about local history, but he hadn't realized the depth of her investigations. The more he studied the maps, the more he understood her fascination with the region. She hadn't just been interested in folklore, she'd been mapping geological formations, underground springs, and ancient ley lines, invisible pathways of energy that were believed to crisscross the earth, and all the lines converged on his farm. One particular map, marked with a series of cryptic symbols, caught his attention. The symbols corresponded to locations of unusual rock formations and subtle energy fluctuations beneath the surface of his land. She thought this place was special, he murmured to Lily, showing her the map. Lily traced the lines with her finger, her brow furrowed in concentration. She said Grandma used to talk about a heartbeat beneath the fields, a kind of energy that made the land fertile. He realized Sarah hadn't been chasing ghost stories. She'd been pursuing something real, something powerful, and the harvesters had known about it all along. As spring approached, a fragile hope began to blossom. The rain finally came, a gentle, steady drizzle that soaked into the parched earth. Caleb, with Lily helping, began the arduous task of rebuilding. They cleared debris from the fields, repaired the fences, and prepared the soil for planting. "What are we going to grow, Dad?" Lily asked, her voice filled with cautious optimism. He looked at her, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "Wheat, honey. We're going to grow wheat." It wasn't about defying the harvesters or proving a point. It was about reclaiming their livelihood, about nurturing the land, about honoring Sarah's memory. The day they planted the new seeds was a turning point. The sun shone brightly, warming their faces as they walked through the fields, scattering the seeds into the fertile soil. They planted carefully, deliberately, imbuing each seed with a silent prayer for a bountiful harvest. Weeks passed, and the wheat began to sprout, a vibrant green carpet spreading across the landscape. The farm was slowly coming back to life. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, Caleb walked out to the original crop circle. He hadn't been back since the raid, afraid of what he might find. The circle was still there, a flattened patch of earth amidst the burgeoning wheat fields. It was a stark reminder of the darkness they'd faced. But something was different. In the center of the circle, pushing through the soil, stood a single stalk of wheat. It wasn't like the others. It was taller, thicker, radiating a soft, unnatural golden glow. Caleb knelt, examining the stalk with a mixture of awe and trepidation. It pulsed with a faint warmth, as if it were alive. It was beautiful, otherworldly, and deeply unsettling. He touched the stalk, feeling a strange, tingling sensation in his fingertips. A whisper of wind rustled through the surrounding wheat, carrying a faint, elusive scent. He looked up, scanning the horizon. The sky was clear, but a swirling dust storm was brewing in the distance, a dark, ominous cloud gathering on the edge of the world. The land had been appeased, for now. But Caleb knew with a chilling certainty that the harvest was never truly over, and the unsettling glow of the single radiant stalk served as a silent warning. The seeds of doubt had been sown, and the land was still watching, waiting for the next cycle to begin.